So what do you do with extra epoxy when you're making a project and you work in the small shop? There's lots of answers to that question. I've seen some pretty interesting ones. Four Eyes did a great example using extra epoxy. For me, I build side projects. And as you can see here from my desk video, I tried to build some coasters. Poured the epoxy, had everything set up, was smart enough to have the project ready to go before I started pouring the big pour. Everything was great. Got to flatten those out. So let's glue them down and run them through the planer a few times. What could go wrong? Oh, everything. That's right. Guess I didn't glue them down well enough. The planer grabbed onto them and shot them at the other end. The burnt cedar was toast, but the rest of them are savable. The other coasters I poured in a bucket, and you can see there, they've got a rounded bottom. So I've got to go through and flatten that off. Flip over the belt sander, clamp it into the vise, and flatten away. And flatten some more. Dad, are we there yet? Oh, we are there. Okay, great. With the bottoms flattened, go back to making them round. Using a 40 grip belt here and just spinning them on the belt sander. I'll tell you, this is not the best way to do this. It's the way that I have right now, or at least as the time of filming this video, but it's not a great way. And once I've got the bottom flat and the sides rounded, I can cut off the extra bits of wood that were sticking out, which I did over on the bandsaw, and then come back and flatten the top too. And you can see there, I just randomly sunk some bits of walnut, chunks of offcuts, random pieces into the epoxy. Didn't have a plan in mind, just toss in some wood and let's go for a random look. And so that's what you get. Working here to round the sides and get them all smooth. And once I've got everything to approximately the size that I want, I can come back and start using the orbital sander to really dial in things. I've got a couple of dogs on my tabletop there that I'm using to hold the back edges of the coasters while I'm sanding. Then you can see the piece of wood, and that allows me to spin the coasters a little bit while I'm sanding, but also keep them from flying off. I find to do the edges, placing the orbital on my lap, and then holding the coasters with one hand and spinning them with the other gives me the most circular surface I can get. Again, probably not the best way to do this, but in the absence of a better set of tools, that was the way I chose. You can see here, with a lot of work, I've recovered at least one of the coasters that was shut at the back of the planer. I ended up recovering two. The two that were both a river-style design. The burnt cedar, that was a goner. There was no saving that one. With the squares, cut them down to size, and I can use those still with the way that they came out. But I want to get them to the right size and clean up those edges on the epoxy so that I've got nice flat and smooth surfaces. With two sides, cut to flat. Best way to do this is put a stop block in place. That way I get a perfect square. So I can set my width on one, cut the edge, rotate 90 degrees, and cut the other edge, and I'll get a perfectly square coaster, which is going to be much more appealing than had I not cut it square, and it looked a little funny. You can see here a couple of spots where the epoxy was low, Had to come back in and fill that with some CA glue, and then back to sanding. I'll do all the coasters the same way, even the flat ones. I'll do the edges with the palm sander or the orbital sander in my lap. To do the sides, I find just running them along that way is the easiest. I could build a jig to hold them, and that's probably, a future project, but in this case, I find just doing all the sides this way, I get the flattest surface, not too much wobble in there, so I don't get too much rounding on the edge, and it gives a nice finish. Same with the circular coasters as you saw before and on this shot. Just spinning them on that edge works real nice. I have my compressor around this time, so blowing everything off with the compressed air, best way to do it. Gets everything blown off, all the dust away real good. I'll still come back in here with some mineral spirits just to really get away all that extra. And it's a really good chance with the mineral spirits to see what you're going to get when you're done. It really brings out the grain and everything else. Fresh pot of Osmo. Didn't do any ultra thin on this. Not a lot of material here that's actually wood. It's primarily epoxy, so just went straight to the Osmo Pollux. Apply a coat to all the coasters. I do one side at a time. So tops, let them dry, wipe them off. Bottoms, let them dry, wipe them off. Like to do the tops first so that they rest on the bottom as they're, sitting for the week after. So bottoms were done first. Now tops come in. Make sure I get the sides while I do that, and rub in that Osmo nicely. You can really see the random patterns there by just dropping the pieces of walnut in, and that also causes some really interesting pile up of the pigmentation. You can see, especially in the lower portion of the shot there, that pigment just sort of like all gapped together in sort of some of the smaller gaps, and you get some really interesting colors that appear. I used a couple of pigments in there, and that really helped to bring out a different look. And then, of course, here I've got the Two River style coasters, and I'll be honest, one of them didn't turn out very well, and after I was done the video, I went back and carved away some of the epoxy and refilled it with another layer. I'd used a bit of CA glue, some clear CA glue, and you could really clearly see where that CA glue was. Didn't like it. Didn't want to use it. Send it back. Redo it. For the rest of them, they are going to be something for my parents. I've been told by my wife that I'm not allowed to have any more coasters. I make too many. They're easy projects like this to do. And so anything left over here, my parents are always happy to have my random projects or friends. Friends always like free stuff too. But these ones are going to go up to my parents' lake house, and they'll use them up there. Once the Osmo has sat for a good 20 minutes or so, come back and wipe away all that excess. Just make sure that you don't leave anything behind. I made the mistake of doing that on a project recently, not one that I filmed, and it was a nightmare to get off. It probably took me 2 hours to clear a surface the size of one of these coasters on 4 pieces. So really just make sure that you come back and clear that off. As I showed in a previous video as well, liking the finish by using those maroon buffing pads. So coming in and wiping all the surfaces with the maroon buffing pad. And by wiping, I really mean almost like sanding. And that really helps to bump up the sheen and really brings some good clarity in the finish. So I'm really appreciating that as a finishing method, and I'll be using that more often. Did that with all the coasters, 2 coats of Osmo on, and we're good to go. My methodology for putting bottoms on coasters is a bag of corks. I bought a bag of 4x4 corks. They work real nice. They cut pretty easily with either a marking knife or an X-Acto. And so for the square coasters, I cut a couple of squares. For the circular ones, used an old beer cup and marked a circle in that's about the right size. I had pre-checked that, of course. And then I can just cut that away with the X-Acto, and pretty good way to do things here. I don't know if I'll do cork in the future. It's worked out okay, but it does kind of hold water or liquid if you spill any, so I don't love that. And it doesn't cut super nicely. It cuts easily, but it leaves a rough finish, and so you got to come back with a sanding block and clear away any of that rough material on the outside edges. It's not a lot of work. It takes a minute or so for each one, but you know, for these small projects, not necessarily something that I want to do. The product I use is adhesive backed, which is super convenient. Peel off that backing layer, line up with the diameter or the surface, and just stick it right on, and that's it. You see here the circles. I'm doing the full piece, obviously with a circle. That makes sense. Some of the square coasters that I make, I'll use a full piece. Others, and you'll see that here, I'll just use squares in each corner. I don't know if there's a better way, one way or the other. A little bit of air underneath is probably not a bad thing, just so it breathes. And you get just as good stability whether you use a full piece or the four corners like you'll see here. I'll do it both ways, and it's really just how I'm feeling that day, which one I'm going to do. And with that, that'll wrap it up for this one. A few shots of some coasters. I didn't get some of them in these shots because I gave them to my mother and didn't have time to capture the video before she was picking them up. So I threw a couple extras in just for fun. Thanks everyone. Have a good one.